That looks like a dress for poor people, my daughter sneered, her eyes scanning the fabric with cold disgust. Before I could even defend the weeks of sleepless nights I had poured into it, she grabbed the dress and shoved it straight into the kitchen trash can. The laughter of her wealthy friends echoed in the room like glass shattering, cutting me deeper than any needle ever could. I spent the entire night sewing my daughter's dress, stitch by stitch, without stopping even for a second to rest my eyes. Every stitch was a memory, and every thread was a promise. The ticking of the clock kept me company until dawn, marking the passing hours as if it were the echo of my own life unraveling little by little. When I finished, the first ray of sunlight came through the window and rested on the white fabric. It was beautiful. It did not have the sparkle of the boutiques or the price tag of famous designers, but it was made with the love of a mother who, even after a lifetime of sacrifices, still believed that affection could cure everything. I carried the dress with trembling hands, wrapped in an old sheet to protect it. When I arrived at Emily's house, my daughter was surrounded by friends, laughing and drinking coffee from fine china cups. She looked like one of those movie stars you see on TV, perfect, haughty, distant. For a moment I felt proud, and then it happened. Emily looked up, observed me from top to bottom, and asked, "Is that the dress?" I nodded, smiling. I unwrapped the fabric with care, as if revealing a treasure. She looked at it for barely a few seconds, and then, with a grimace of contempt, she let it out. "This looks like a dress for poor people." Her friends laughed under their breath, and before I could react, she took the dress and threw it into the wastebasket. "I am not getting married dressed like a seamstress, Mom." I felt the air leaving my lungs. I said nothing, not a single word. I just picked up my pride from the floor and walked out slowly, before they noticed I was crying. But before continuing, I want to extend a very special invitation to you. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like. This helps me see that you support me and enjoy my stories. And comment down below which city you are watching us from. Now let us continue. I walked back home with my vision blurred. The sun was beating down hard, but I only felt cold. The dress was still in my mind, every stitch burning like an open wound. I thought about the sleepless nights, the years working with that old machine my mother left me, the calluses on my hands, everything I had given so Emily could get to where she was. And I asked myself when exactly love turned into a reason for shame. Sometimes you give so much of yourself to someone that you end up empty, wondering if they ever really saw you at all. Upon arriving, I sat in front of the sewing machine. I looked at it for a long time. Its sound, once so familiar, now seemed like a lament to me. I touched the pedal, as if seeking comfort in its vibration, and I felt a strange impulse. It was not sadness. It was something new. A cold, dangerous calm. The calm that only comes when a heart breaks. And instead of crumbling, it starts to plan. Days passed, and my daughter did not call, not even to apologize. I found out from others that the designer dress was already ready, imported from Italy, perfect, just as she said. But perfection has no soul. And that dress, no matter how beautiful it was, could never tell her history. Then one afternoon, I went to her house. I waited for her to leave, and I entered without making a noise. The smell of expensive perfume and fresh flowers filled the whole atmosphere, but in a corner of the room, the wastebasket was still there. And there, among crumpled papers and scraps of fabric, I found my dress. Wrinkled, stained, humiliated, but whole, just like me. I took it out slowly, hugged it against my chest, and took it home. I spread it out on the table and observed it under the sunset light. It was beautiful, even in its misery, like a mother who continues to love even when she is wounded. I passed my hand over the seams, and I felt that my love still lived there, between every thread. And then I knew it. that dress was not going to end up in the trash. During the following nights, I locked myself in the workshop. I did not sleep, I did not eat, I just sewed. I embroidered crystal flowers on the hem, I added antique lace, and between every layer of fabric, I hid something more than decorations. I hid my story. I put a stitch for every tear, a thread for every sacrifice, a flower for every day I spent without being seen. While the dress transformed, so did I. I was no longer the submissive mother who bowed her head before her daughter's contempt. I was a woman who understood that love does not mean enduring everything, but choosing what is worth keeping. I guess we spend so much time trying to be good mothers that we forget we are people too, deserving of the same respect we freely give. When I finished, the mirror returned a different image to me. My eyes no longer held sadness, but determination. The dress shone under the workshop lamp, and in its shine, there was something more than beauty. There was justice. The wedding day arrived. I did not plan to go, but destiny, or perhaps self-love, pushed me to do it. I put on my simple dress, pulled back my hair, and walked out with a firm step. Every step was a new heartbeat, every breath a silent declaration. I am not the same anymore. When I arrived at the ballroom, the air was full of music and laughter, lights, flowers, glasses toasting. Emily, radiant, wore her luxurious foreign lace gown. She was beautiful, yes, but empty. She did not see me enter, and I did not want her to see me yet either. I stayed by the door, observing in silence. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of what was about to come. Because that night, my daughter was not only going to have a wedding, she was going to have a lesson. And when the clock struck 10, I took the first step toward the center of the room. The murmuring ceased. All eyes turned toward me. Emily looked up, her smile vanished, and in that instant, I understood that destiny had been preparing me for that moment all my life. Because sometimes a mother's love is not demonstrated with tears, but with a dress that shines brighter than shame. The needles were always my best friends. Since I was 12 years old, when my mother taught me to sew a button, I knew that would be my way of speaking to the world. I was never one for easy words, but my hands knew how to say things my voice could not. And during decades, between threads, fabrics, and silences, I learned that every seam could contain a story, even a life. When I became a widow, Emily was barely 6 years old. My husband, Jack, died in a construction accident, and from one day to the next, I was left alone with a little girl and a sewing machine. I remember crying that night in front of the window, but the next morning I turned on the machine, wiped my tears, and began to sew. Since then, every garment that left my hands carried a promise too. I would never let my daughter go hungry. We lived in a tiny room behind the sewing workshop where I worked. Emily slept on a small wooden bed surrounded by scraps of fabric that she sometimes used to make improvised dolls. I watched her play and thought that someday all that sacrifice would make sense, that someday she would understand that love can also be embroidered. During years, my fingers bled over other people's wedding fabrics, silk dresses, imported lace, dreams of women who could pay for what I would never have. Sometimes, while I sewed the veils of others, I imagined how the day my own daughter got married would be. I dreamed of sewing her the most beautiful dress in the world, not because it was perfect, but because it would be made with the only thing I never lacked, love. When Emily turned 16, I was able to buy her first new dress, not secondhand, not mended, new, in a sky blue color, with a white ribbon I embroidered on the chest. That night, seeing her dance, I felt that everything was worth it. She hugged me tight and whispered in my ear, "You are the best mom in the world." That phrase stayed engraved in me. I did not know that years later, those same words would sound like a sad echo, like a broken promise. Emily grew up and with the years began to drift away from the world that had formed us. She went to study in the city thanks to a loan I managed to get by selling my old machine. She worked, she ascended, she met different people. When she returned, she was someone else. Her voice had changed, her look too. She no longer said mom, she said mother. And every time I spoke, I noticed on her face a mixture of annoyance and shame. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but the signs were there. The calls she did not return, the visits increasingly brief, and that comment she made one day without looking me in the eyes. I wish you could have studied. That phrase pierced me like a needle in the heart, because, without knowing it, she was telling me that the love I gave her was not enough, that my hands, the same ones that sewed her childhood, no longer had value in her world. Even so, when she told me she was getting married, I felt a pure, innocent joy. I thought that finally I could give her what I dreamed of for so many years, her wedding dress. I proposed doing it myself, and although she hesitated, she ended up accepting. I took it as a sign of reconciliation, as an opportunity to unite what distance had broken. That night, I sat in front of the machine and prayed before starting. Lord, guide my hands. Let every stitch be a blessing. I spent entire days choosing fabrics I could afford: ivory lace, soft tulle, and small pearls that a client had left me as payment. Every thread carried a wish, every fold a hidden tear, and inside the lining, where no one else could see it, I sewed a tiny piece of my own wedding dress. It was my way of telling her, without words, "Take me with you, daughter. Even if you do not see me anymore, I will be there." But when everything was finished and she rejected it, it was not just the dress she threw in the trash. It was my story. It was my love. It was the invisible thread that still united us. That night, I did not sleep. I stayed staring at the machine turned off and thought of my mother, of how well she sewed until she ran out of strength. She used to tell me, "Daughter, women like us do not have a sword or a fortune. Our strength is in our hands." And in that moment, I understood it. My strength lay not in being accepted, but in continuing to weave my own destiny, even if they unraveled it again and again. I touched the stained fabric again that I had taken out of the wastebasket, ran my fingers over the broken seams, and felt that my love still beat inside it. I thought about all the times I hugged her without her hugging me back, about the uncomfortable silences, about the "Mom, do not come dressed like that." And I understood that humiliation, if sown with patience, can also become a lesson. Because pain does not destroy. Pain transforms, and that transformation had already begun. During the following days, something changed in me. I began to sew not for her, but for me. Every stitch was a way to heal. The thread ran smooth, almost as if the machine understood my soul. I was no longer embroidering a dress. I was embroidering my freedom. And although Emily did not know it, I already had a plan. The day of her wedding, she would use the dress she chose, but everyone would remember the one she despised. Because there are loves that are forgotten, and others that avenge themselves with elegance. And mine was about to shine. The day of the wedding dawned with a gray sky. It was not raining, but the air smelled like a storm, as if the whole world sensed that something was about to break. I dressed in the only decent suit I had, the same one I had used at my mother's funeral, and I combed my hair with care, not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because that day I was going to face my past with my head held high. I stored the restored dress in a white linen bag, folded with the precision of someone keeping a secret. It was not a gift, nor a complaint. It was an answer, a silent answer to a daughter who had forgotten what it means to love without shame. When I left the house, the wind was blowing hard. I walked to the bus stop with my hands clutching the bag as if it were my own heart. The journey to the event hall was long, and in every curve of the road, I remembered the moments when my daughter and I were a single soul, when we laughed without reason, when she hugged me without fear of being seen. But those memories, now, hurt more than needles. The wedding hall was huge, with gold columns and a ceiling so high it seemed to touch the sky. White lights, exotic flowers, glasses shining on the tables. Everything was perfect and empty. I stayed at the door for a few seconds, observing people laughing, toasting, and taking photos. Emily was in the center, glowing with her new dress, a dress that, despite its price, could not hide the ice in her gaze. When she saw me, her smile froze. I walked toward her, but before arriving, a woman, the groom's mother, I assumed, approached and blocked my path with a tense smile. "You are Emily's mom, right?" I nodded. "Ah, delighted," she said insincerely. "Could you wait a moment back there in the back? We are about to start the family photos." She looked me up and down, with that look that weighs more than words, the same judgment I endured in silence so many times. And I obeyed. I stayed in the back, near the curtains, like a ghost at the party of her own blood. During the ceremony, no one spoke to me. Some greeted me out of obligation, others simply ignored me. Emily did not even introduce me. I was not her mother that day. I was just an uncomfortable memory she preferred to hide. The music started, the bride and groom danced, and the room exploded in applause. I applauded too, but with trembling hands, not from emotion, but from contained rage. I watched my daughter hug her new husband, so secure, so haughty, as if life finally belonged to her. And for a moment I wondered if perhaps she had forgotten who held her when life wanted to break her, who taught her to get up, who sewed her first dress, who exchanged tears for hopes. And then I knew. She had not forgotten. She had only denied it. Because sometimes love hurts so much that one prefers to bury it rather than accept it. It is strange how we can be in a room full of people and feel like the only person on earth, completely invisible to the one heart that should know us best. I decided to stay a little longer, not to see her, but to observe. I wanted to understand at what moment my daughter stopped being my daughter. One of the bridesmaids approached me with an uncomfortable smile. "Do you need anything, ma'am?" "Just to see," I replied. "See what?" "How a mother is forgotten." The young woman lowered her gaze, not knowing what to say. I smiled calmly. There was no anger in my voice, only an old, deep sadness that no longer sought culprits. At midnight, when the guests were dancing and the music covered all conversations, I got up from my seat and walked toward the center of the room. The dress was in my hands, eyes turned toward me, one by one, until the murmur died down. Emily turned around, confused. Her face lost its color. "What are you doing here, Mom?" she whispered nervously. "Please, sit down." "I just came to return something that belongs to me," I told her, showing the white bag. The murmuring returned, this time louder. Some laughed, others remained motionless. I opened the bag with delicacy and took out the dress, the same one she had called a dress for poor people. But it was no longer the same. It shone. The lights of the hall reflected in the small stones I embroidered one by one, and the restored lace looked woven by angels. It was a dress worthy of any queen. The silence was absolute. Emily took a step back, her eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in a long time, it was not because of my fault. "What is this?" she whispered, trembling. "Your dress, daughter, the one you rejected." "But it is beautiful." "Yes," I said calmly. "I transformed it, just like myself. You threw it in the trash, but I did not, because there are things a mother does not abandon, even if they are despised." The people held their breath. I lifted the dress and held it out in front of everyone. I did not sew this dress with money, I said, but with sacrifice, with the nights I did not sleep, with the years I refused to give up. Every thread carries my story, every stitch, my name. Emily covered her face with her hands. Mom, please stop. No, daughter, I replied. Stop was what I told myself when I saw you being ashamed of me. Today I did not come to scold you. I came to remind you where you come from. Suddenly, the applause began. First shy, then louder. The bridesmaids, the guests, even the groom's mother. Everyone was applauding. Emily fell to her knees, crying. I looked at her, without pride, without resentment, only with a serenity she did not know. I approached, took her face between my hands, and whispered to her, "There is no shame in being humble. The shame is in forgetting who taught you to fly." She nodded between tears. She tried to hug me, but I took a step back. "Not yet," I told her. "Not until you learn what it really means to love." I turned around, holding the dress, and walked toward the door amidst the applause. Every step was a goodbye, every look a scar that was closing. And when I crossed the threshold, I knew that something had ended forever. I was no longer the ashamed mother who sewed in silence. I was a woman who had learned that dignity is also sewn, stitch by stitch. That night, when I left the hall with the dress in my hands, I felt that the air belonged to me again. The moon hung over the sky like an old lamp, and the party lights reflected in the lace, giving it an almost supernatural shine. There was no music or applause outside, only the silence of a woman who had said what she had to say, without shouting. I walked slowly to my house. Every step resonated in the empty street like one more stitch, closing forever the wound my daughter had left me. I did not cry. I could not. I had cried so much in my life that night I was dry. Only my heart ached, but not from sadness, but from tiredness. Upon arriving, I hung the dress in front of the mirror. It was beautiful, too beautiful for contempt. But what nobody knew, not even Emily, was that inside that dress there was something more than threads and embroidery. There was a hidden truth. Weeks before the wedding, when I decided to rescue the dress from the wastebasket, I not only restored it, I also transformed it into a silent letter. Inside the lining, between the layers of tulle and lace, I sewed small handwritten notes, pieces of folded paper, with care, where I had left fragments of my history, of her childhood, of my soul. In one of them I wrote, "When you were born, I thought life had returned to me what it took away. I never imagined that love could also hurt when too much is given." In another, I sewed your first dress with old fabric, but with hands full of hope. I did not know that someday you would be ashamed of the love that sheltered you. And in the last one, the smallest, the most secret, I put a phrase that had been my mother's. "The thread that unites a mother and a daughter does not break. It only tightens until one of the two learns to let go." I did not know if Emily would find those notes. I did not know if she would ever have the courage to open the dress, but I did it anyway. Because sometimes one sows words so they bloom when silence is no longer enough. During the following days, the wedding was the topic of conversation in the whole neighborhood. Some neighbors came to congratulate me, others simply to be nosy. I listened to them in silence while I sewed in my workshop. I did not like talking about the topic, not because I was ashamed, but because I knew the true ending had not arrived yet. And it arrived sooner than I imagined. 3 days later, Emily appeared at my door. She was pale, with swollen eyes and a broken voice. "Mom, can we talk?" I remained motionless. For a second, I wanted to hug her, but something inside me told me to wait. "Sure," I replied calmly. She entered slowly, as if she feared the house would reject her too. She sat in the chair where so many times she had waited for me to finish sewing her a uniform, a dress, a life. She had the dress in her hands. She placed it on the table without looking at me. "I opened it," she said. "I see. I found your letters?" The silence filled with her ragged breathing. For the first time, I saw her vulnerable. She was no longer the haughty woman from the wedding. She was my little girl again. "I did not know," she whispered. "I did not know how much you had done for me." I lowered my gaze. "You did not have to know. Mothers do not count the stitches. We just sew." "I was a fool, Mom." "No, daughter," I told her. "You were human, and pride is also inherited, like eye color." Emily broke down crying. She knelt beside me, like when she was little. She took my hands, and I felt they were trembling just like mine. "Forgive me." "You do not have to ask for my forgiveness," I said. "You have to learn." We stayed like that in silence. I did not cry, because forgiveness, when it is sincere, does not hurt. It relieves. Emily rested her head on my legs, and for an instant I felt the weight of her childhood again, the same warmth, the same fragility. It was as if the years had gone backward. After a while, she looked at me. "Can I stay with you for a few days?" she asked. "Of course," I replied, smiling. "But you will have to earn your bread." "Sewing?" "Sewing, sweeping, cooking, living." That night, we had dinner together for the first time in years. The silence between us was no longer uncomfortable. It was warm, necessary. Emily ate in silence, and from time to time she observed me, as if she were seeing a stranger. "I always believed you were weak," she said suddenly. "And now?" "Now I know you were just tired." "Yes, daughter," I replied with a smile. "Love also tires." The next day, while she slept, I took the dress and stored it in a wooden box. I did not do it to keep it as a trophy, but as a testimony, proof that the most broken ties can also be sewn again, if one has the courage to accept the scars. Before closing the box, I added a last note. "When you read this, maybe I will no longer be here, but I want you to remember that humility is not inherited. It is learned. And you, my daughter, already made the first stitch." I closed the box carefully and stored it in the closet, next to my threads, my needles, and the scraps of blue fabric from her Sweet 16 dress. Everything that had been my life, everything that once defined me, fit now in that silent corner. And for the first time in many years, I felt peace. Not the peace of oblivion, but that of someone who has sewn her soul again and has left it perfect, with the wound in sight. The days Emily spent with me were different from everything we had lived before. For the first time in years, we shared breakfast, conversations, and silences that no longer hurt. I sewed in my workshop, and she, sitting by the window, observed me. Sometimes she knitted with me, clumsily, pricking her fingers, laughing between tears when the thread escaped her. It was like seeing her return to be the girl who used to ask me why Mom's dresses were always the prettiest, even if they had no glitter. But peace, like everything in life, does not last long when there are open wounds. One afternoon, while we were washing the dishes, the phone rang. Emily dried her hands and answered. Her face changed instantly. "It is Edward's mom," she murmured, her husband's mother, the same woman who at the wedding had looked at me as if I were a servant. Emily listened in silence, nodding nervously. When she hung up, she told me with a low voice, "She will come to dinner tomorrow. She says she wants to talk to me and with you." The cup I had in my hand slipped and fell to the floor, breaking into pieces. "With me?" I asked. Yes, Mom. She said it is important. Then let her come, I said firmly, but let her come with the truth, not with manners. That night I did not sleep, not from fear, but from a hunch. There was something about that woman that seemed familiar to me, something I could not identify. I spent the hours cleaning the tablecloth, polishing the silverware, preparing a simple dinner. Not because I wanted to please her, but because good manners are not lost, even if others ignore them. When the clock struck 8, the sound of the doorbell cut the silence of the house. Emily opened the door. The lady entered, wrapped in an elegant coat and a perfume too strong, one of those that try to cover the smell of the past. "Good evening," she said, barely looking at me. "Good evening," I replied. "Come in, please." We sat at the table. During the first minutes, no one spoke. Emily feigned serenity, but her hand trembled on the napkin. The lady played with the silverware, avoiding looking at me. I waited, because I knew that truths, sooner or later, unravel themselves. "Mrs. Catherine Reynolds," she began finally, "I suppose you do not remember me." "No, ma'am," I said, "but my memory does not forget voices that hurt, and yours, at the wedding, was clear." Emily tightened her lips. The woman sighed, lowering her gaze. "You are right, and I came exactly because of that." There was a long silence. Only the clock dared to speak. She continued. "Many years ago, when I was young, my mother had a seamstress, a woman who sewed better than anyone, although she charged almost nothing. I was arrogant, haughty, and treated her with contempt. I demanded miracles from her, made her wait hours to pay her, and sometimes not even that. Until one day, that woman disappeared from the workshop. I found out later that she had been widowed and had a little girl. My hands went cold. My heart skipped a beat. "What are you saying?" I asked. The woman looked at me with damp eyes. "That woman was you." For a moment, the world stopped. I remembered that workshop from so many years ago. I remembered her young face, her jewelry, her authoritative voice. Yes, it was her, Mrs. Catherine Reynolds, the same woman who humiliated me for a poorly made stitch and fired me without paying me. "I did not know," I whispered, more to myself than to her. "I did know," Catherine replied, "the day of our children's wedding. When I saw you in the ballroom, I knew who you were, but I did not have the courage to approach, because shame weighs more than gold." Emily looked at me horrified. "You worked for her, Mom?" I nodded. "Yes, daughter, and it was from her words that I learned never to let myself be humiliated again." Catherine lowered her head. "I came to ask for your forgiveness, Susan. You cannot imagine how much I have carried that guilt. I believed money made me better. But when I saw you that night in the ballroom, with that dress in your hands, I understood that I had spent my whole life admiring in silence what I never had: dignity." Emily cried in silence. I took a deep breath, looking at that woman who had done me so much harm, and for the first time I did not see an enemy. I saw someone who, like me, had lived deceived by her own pride. "Forgiveness is not asked for with words, Mrs. Reynolds," I said calmly. "It is demonstrated with actions." "I know. That is why I came. And what do you want to do now?" "Help." "Help me with what?" "To open your own workshop." Emily lifted her head surprised. "My mother? A workshop?" "Yes," Catherine responded. "With her talent, she can teach other women. I can put up the capital, not to clear my conscience, but to do something good with what I once used to humiliate." I looked at her in silence. Inside, a part of me wanted to reject her offer, scream at her that forgiveness is not bought with money. But another part, the wiser one, the one that had learned to sew wounds, told me that sometimes accepting help is also an act of self-love. "All right," I said finally. "I accept, but with one condition." "Whichever you want," Catherine replied. "The workshop will carry my mother's name." What was her name? Hope, because that was the only thing I never lost. But for us, let's call it threads of hope. Emily got up from the table and hugged me tight. "Mom, I cannot believe it." "Believe it, daughter. Life does not always give revenge, but it does turn around. And sometimes, when the wheel turns, seamstresses teach queens how to mend their souls." Catherine nodded, crying. "You are right. Money runs out. Dignity is inherited." "And humility," I added, "is not washed with money. It is earned with gestures." The dinner ended with a different silence, that of things finally finding their place. Before leaving, Catherine shook my hand. "Thank you for letting me in. Thank you for daring to return," I responded. When the door closed, Emily looked at me with eyes full of pride. "Mom, I did not know you were so strong." "No, daughter, I am not strong. I just learned that the firmest stitches are the ones made after having been broken." But before continuing, I want to extend a very special invitation to you. Tell me here in the comments what you think of this story so far and what you would have done in my place. Do not leave the video, because what comes next will give you goosebumps. Because although that night it seemed everything had been left behind, a deeper truth, one that neither Catherine nor Emily nor I suspected, was about to come to light, and that truth would change our lives forever. The night following that dinner, I slept restlessly. It was not guilt nor emotion, it was intuition. There was something in Catherine Reynolds' words that did not quite add up. Too much interest, too much remorse, too late. I woke up before dawn. The air smelled of damp earth, and the bird song sounded distant, as if coming from another world. I poured myself a coffee, and while the house was still silent, I took the dress box. I opened it and ran my fingers over the lace, over the notes I myself had hidden in the lining. I thought about my mother, about her voice saying, "Truths, daughter, are not sought, they are unstitched," and, without knowing why, that phrase accompanied me all day. Catherine returned a week later, with papers in hand and a carefully rehearsed smile. "I bring the workshop contract, Susan," she told me. "So soon? I do not want to waste time. I have been thinking a lot about all this." Emily watched us from the table, with that mix of joy and doubt that only children feel when they see their mothers approaching their old wounds. We sat down. Catherine unfolded the documents, speaking to me of loans, machinery, space, and employees. I nodded, but something in her tone seemed strange to me. It was not just regret, it was fear. "What hurries you so much, Mrs. Reynolds?" I asked her. "Hurry me? No. I just want to do things right. I do not mean the workshop. I mean you." The woman looked at me surprised. "I do not understand." "Yes, you do." I looked her in the eyes. "You have something you have not said." Her face paled. She lowered her gaze. Her hands trembled on the tablecloth. Emily frowned, not understanding. 30 years ago," she began with a trembling voice, "my mother did not only have seamstresses, she also had secrets. I was young, reckless. I had a comfortable life, but empty. And then I met a man." I felt a chill run through my body. I knew, without knowing how, who she was referring to. "His name was Jack," she said, and the coffee got stuck in my throat. My breathing stopped. "That was the name of my late husband, Emily's father." "What are you saying?" I asked, barely with a voice. What I should have told you years ago, Catherine replied with tears. Your husband worked in my mother's workshop before marrying you. He was a noble boy, quiet. And I fell in love with him. Emily jumped in the chair. What? I never told him, Catherine continued. I never looked for him after he got married. But the day he died, I was there. The air became heavy. Emily looked at me horrified. What does that mean, Mom? I could not speak. Catherine continued between sobs. I went to the hospital because I found out from a friend. I arrived late. I only saw how they were transferring him. He had an envelope in his hand, an envelope addressed to you, Susan. My eyes blurred. For years I had believed that Jack left nothing, that his death was as sudden as his silence. An envelope? I whispered. Catherine nodded. She took out of her bag an aged paper, carefully folded. I kept it. I did not know if I should deliver it. I thought you would hate me. But after the wedding thing, I knew I could not keep this any longer. My hands were trembling when I took it. The paper was yellowed, the edge worn. I opened it carefully. Inside, Jack's handwriting was still firm, straight, unmistakable. Susan, if you are reading this, it means I did not manage to tell you what you deserve to hear. I was not a good husband, nor a good father, but there is something you do not know. Before you, I made mistakes. One of them follows my steps until today. If ever a woman named Catherine Reynolds appears, do not hate her. Just tell her I forgive her, because she was also a victim of the same pride that destroyed me. The paper fell from my hands. Emily picked it up and read it in silence, with tears running down her face. I stayed looking at Catherine, who was crying with her hands in her lap. For an instant, all the pieces fit. The humiliation, the regret, her insistence on repairing. It was not just guilt, it was redemption. My mother destroyed many people, Susan, she said between sobs, and I followed her example. Until I saw you that night, in the ballroom, with your dress, and I understood that I also had to ask forgiveness for inherited sins. I got up slowly. I did not feel rage, only a deep sadness, because life has strange ways of uniting the threads we cut with hatred. And why didn't you tell me before? I asked. Because it was not the time, she replied. Because forgiveness is not asked for until one can look in the eyes of the one they hurt. Emily got up, trembling. So my husband's father? No, I interrupted her gently. He has nothing to do with you, daughter. Your father was mine. His past does not belong to us. I hugged her. For the first time, I felt we were closing a cycle that had been bleeding for decades. Mrs. Reynolds, I said finally, if your intention was to ask forgiveness, you have done it, but no more is needed. The workshop, we can open it, but not to clean guilts. We will open it to teach other women that the past is not erased with luxury or tears, but with purpose. She nodded, wiping her eyes. Thank you, Susan. And if you really want to honor my husband's memory, do not forget this, I added. Wounds are not covered with silk, they are sewn with truth. That night, after she left, Emily stayed looking out the window. Mom, everything you lived, everything you endured was for love, right? Yes, daughter, but not only for your father, also for you. Because one day I understood that a mother's love is the only one that does not need applause. She rested her head on my shoulder, and in that silence I understood that sometimes justice does not come with screams or revenges, but with the peace of knowing that the truth, however painful it may be, sets you free. The following week, when emotions seemed to have calmed down, I received a letter. It was from a notary in the city. On the envelope, my name was written in elegant and ancient handwriting. Mrs. Susan Miller. For a second, I felt my heart stop. It had been years since I saw that surname next to mine. Jack had left me in many ways, first with silence, then with his absence. And now, from death, he seemed to speak to me again. The envelope weighed more than I imagined. I opened it slowly, with trembling hands, and inside I found a sealed letter and a small brown envelope closed with wax. Emily was with me, and seeing my pale face, she said, "Mom, are you okay?" "I don't know," I replied, "but it seems your father did not take everything with him." We sat together. I slid the letter between my fingers. I took a deep breath and opened it. Jack's voice, written in those lines, seemed still warm, as if time had not passed. "Susan, if this letter reaches your hands, it is because something I could not resolve in life finally found its way. I never knew how to ask forgiveness with words, but you always understood the language of silence, and that is why I trust you will know how to read between the lines of what I leave you. I did not give you an easy life, but I hope that at least this that I leave you gives you something more valuable than money, the truth." Inside the brown envelope, there are documents of an account I never mentioned to you. It is not big, but it was made with the work of my hands, without stains. It is for you and for Emily, so you never again depend on anyone's pity. But above all, there is something else. A notebook. In it, I wrote everything I did not know how to tell you, and everything I learned watching you love, even when they did not reciprocate. If you remember me, do not do it for my mistakes, but for the stitches life forced us to make together. I stayed still, staring at the words. It was the first time in years I felt Jack spoke to me from the soul, without pretexts or masks. Emily hugged me tightly. "Mom, Dad loved you." "Yes," I said with contained tears. "But he didn't know how to do it." The brown envelope contained a leather notebook, worn at the corners. Inside were pages full of Jack's handwriting, messy, as if he had written them at different moments of his life. The first ones spoke of us, of the day we met, of my laughter in the workshop, of how my way of sewing made him feel at home. Then the pages became dark, full of frustration, of guilt, of his fear of not being enough. I cannot stand seeing how the world despises her for being humble. She sews as if with every stitch she repaired the universe, and I only know how to break what she repairs. We read in silence until reaching the last pages. There his tone changed. It seemed written in the last days, when the illness had already consumed him. "If you ever feel alone, Susan, look for the red thread. It is in the drawer of our old house, where you kept the workshop fabrics. That thread was the first one you used to sew Emily's dress. I kept it. I never told you, but when I saw that thread, I remembered why everything was worth it. That thread, love, is the only thing that still unites me to you." That night, I could not sleep. I turned on the lamp and took out the old box where I kept the scraps of antique fabrics. And there it was, the red thread, the same one I had used to mend Emily's baptism dress, the same one with which I sewed my own wedding veil. I took it between my fingers. I could not contain the tears. It was like holding the pulse of the past, as if my whole life was braided in that thread. Emily woke up hearing me cry. She found me on the floor, with the box open. "What's wrong, Mom?" I showed her the thread, and her face softened. "Dad?" "Yes," I whispered. "He kept it all this time." Emily hugged me, and for the first time I understood that love, although imperfect, leaves signs, like breadcrumbs in a dark forest. Sometimes you just have to have the courage to follow them. Days later, Catherine came to the workshop. I had not seen her since the revelation about Jack. She brought flowers and a tired look. "I come to help you with the contract," she said. "It is not necessary. The workshop will open anyway, but on other terms." "Other?" "Yes," I replied. "I will not do it for charity or guilt. I will do it for dignity." I told her about the letter, about the red thread, about Jack. She cried. He also wrote me a letter," she confessed, "but I never had the courage to read it." "Then read it," I told her, "because the dead do not rest until their truths are heard." The day we opened the workshop was luminous. The neighbors, humble women, came curious, some with scraps of fabric, others just with a desire to learn. I hung a sign over the door. Threads of hope. Every stitch has a story. While I taught the young women to sew, I remembered my mother. I remembered my years of hunger and silence, and in the middle of that soft bustle of machines, scissors, and laughter, I felt something I had not felt in decades. True pride. Emily, with her apron on, moved among the students, helping them thread needles. She looked at me and smiled. "See, Mom? It all started with a dress thrown in the trash." "No, daughter," I replied. "It started much earlier, with a mother who never stopped sewing, even if life ripped the thread from her hands." That afternoon, before closing the workshop, I took the red thread and framed it. Underneath, I wrote a phrase with my handwriting. "In the end, all wounds close if you have the courage to hold the needle with love." And while I hung it on the wall, I understood that that thread not only united fabrics, it united generations, stories, pains, and pardons. It was the invisible thread that connected me with my mother, with my husband, with my daughter, and with all the women who had sewn their destiny with wounded hands but intact hearts. That night, before sleeping, I took Jack's notebook one more time. On the last page, with faded ink, there was a phrase I had not seen before. "Love is not always sewn with thread. Sometimes it is sewn with resignation, and others with the silence of someone who waits to be understood in another life." I closed the notebook and turned off the light, and in the dark, with a tired smile but in peace, I understood that I had already been understood. Several years have passed since that wedding, since that night when pride and love measured face to face, and dignity, finally, imposed itself on silence. Today my hair is completely white, and my hands are full of small, fine scars, like paths drawn by time. The workshop is still open, and my granddaughter Lily is already learning to thread her first needle under the warm afternoon sun. I have been a seamstress, a wife, and a mother. But above all, I have been a woman who refused to let the world tell her what she was worth. And as I close my eyes tonight, I remember that while this story is fiction, the dignity within it is as real as the clothes on your back. We all have a red thread somewhere, waiting to be found, reminding us that no matter how much we fray, we can always, always be mended.